Hello, my name's John. I'm one of the pastors here at Newbridge, and so glad to have you joining us online. You're welcome here. I hope that this sermon is helpful and is encouraging to you no matter what's going on in life or no matter where you're at in your spiritual journey. Now, we are no longer live streaming our worship, so you're going to be jumping right into the middle of the service. If you'd like to get an idea of the kind of music that we do here, you can check out some of our older services online, or you can come and join us in person. We'd love to have you here. For now, enjoy this sermon. Again, hope that it's helpful, and I hope to have the opportunity to meet you in person.
Of our lives, that you would lead us into life in the fullest that we have in you. In Jesus' name, amen. You can go ahead and be seated. I'm really excited this morning to introduce our speaker for this morning, our preacher, Kevin Mondo. Some of you have been around and you know Kevin, you've heard him, and so you know why I'm excited about that. Some of you maybe haven't been here before when he's preached. Kevin and his family are a part of our church. Kevin is a friend of mine, and so I can say with great confidence that not only is it clear that the Lord has gifted him, both in preaching and leadership, but even more importantly, that I see this lived out in your life, Kevin. I see this lived out in his life. I see the genuineness of his faith. I see the authenticity and opening up and talking about how to grow closer to Jesus. And so that always makes it, well, it's critical, right? That we not only just have somebody who can get with gifting preach, but with the heart that reflects. And so I'm so excited to have him. Kevin is the Associate Regional Director of Young Life, and so just has a big impact on our area, reaching middle schoolers and high schoolers and young moms for Jesus, strengthening volunteers all around and leaders. We're just so grateful for the ministry of Young Life and the lives that we see changed through it. So would you please welcome with me Kevin Mondo to the stage.
Thank you, John. Man, what a special morning to be here, to be able to be a part of the service. Congratulations to those who were baptized, Corey, Stephanie, and Robert. What an incredible marker in your journey with Christ. Special moment, but it's indicative of what Christ has done and will continue to do in your lives moving forward. The old is gone and the new has come. I'm not even sure we need a sermon today. I feel like that was pretty incredible. But we're going to do it anyway because I prepared something. So I do kind of wish I was sitting in the splash zone over here because that was awesome. But I didn't bring my poncho, so I was safe over here. This series that we're doing, Meals with Jesus, has been really cool, and I think it's really special because I love meals a lot, and I love Jesus. But I love sharing meals with people. It's one of my favorite things to do, whether it's one-on-one or as a family or whatnot. I also think it's important that we recognize that in the cultural context that the Bible was written in, that sharing a meal with somebody was a very special kind of intimate thing that you did with close friends and family. And so there's a lot of significance to that when we talk about sharing meals together. And it's a beautiful illustration of the relationship that God is inviting us into through Jesus. John shared the last couple of weeks, 2 weeks ago, the parable of the great banquet and emphasized that all are invited to dine with Jesus. And then last week, the scene was at the home of Martha and Mary, and he talked about kind of the choice we have of what it looks like to spend time with Jesus. So I'm excited to share from Luke chapter 7. But first, I have a question. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you feel like, maybe I don't belong here? It could be, I was thinking about, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, where I'm thinking about like going to class, maybe it's the first day of class in college or something like that, and the professor might start out by saying, hey, here's what the class is. If that's not what you're here for, you're in the wrong spot. You can feel free to leave. And I don't know if you've ever seen, but I've actually seen a person like awkwardly look around and stand up and like leave. Like they're in the wrong. It's like, dang it. I'm so glad that hasn't happened to me yet. But that person, yeah, they didn't belong there. Or this also happened to me recently where I'm driving in an area that I'm not familiar with, and I'm trying to follow the directions and stuff, and I'm at a stoplight, and then I realize, oh, I'm supposed to be in that lane to turn that way. I'm not where I belong right now. And so then you have to go and make another extra turn and whatnot. Or I got to say that one of my fears in life is to accidentally end up in the wrong public restroom. I don't know. I just like, because sometimes, I don't know if you've been at a restaurant where they try to get real cutesy with how they label the male-female restrooms, and you have to think about it for a second. Like, which one? Like, take a look at this. I'm sorry. Are they just trying to mess with you here? Like, I would sit there for a second and go, I have to get this right before I go in. Then you go in real slow. Yeah, I do not want to end up in a place where I don't belong. Or maybe it's maybe you're in a group of people where you start to feel like, man, I'm not as smart as these people, and I feel out of place. I don't feel like I have anything to contribute to this conversation. If I say something, I'm going to feel dumb. This happened to me in the last week as well. I was having a one-on-one conversation, and we got into a theological discussion. I was like, man, this guy is really smart, and I'm going to kind of stay quiet because I don't want to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe you've been with a group of people or a person who they kind of want to do something that you realize, I don't want to do that. Maybe it's because it's a poor choice, something not safe, not legal, whatever. And you're thinking, man, I don't belong here. I need to get out of this somehow. Some of us have been made to feel like they're not welcome in certain groups or in certain places. Maybe it's at work or at school or something like that, where for whatever it is, people say stuff, or there's just kind of some unspoken things that you're not good enough, or you're not allowed to have a voice in that setting. So you might know how that feels. This woman that we are going to look at in Luke chapter 7 knows this feeling very, very well. And so we're going to start reading in Luke 7:36. We're going to kind of go chunk by chunk. And so you'll have it here on the screen. It says, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. She stood behind him and at his feet weeping. She began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Okay, so let's pause there and kind of reflect on what we're seeing. I'll talk about the Pharisee in a minute, but first we're going to talk about this woman. And there's a couple things to identify who this woman is not, because there are some kind of misconceptions historically that have been talked about with this passage. Some have kind of decided to think that this is probably Mary Magdalene, but as I've looked into this and done some reading about it, there really is no reason to think that this would be that Mary or that woman. In fact, we'll be introduced to Mary Magdalene in the next chapter of Luke chapter 8, and it talks about how Jesus had freed her from demon possession. But it doesn't say anything. There's no reason to connect the two. So just in case that was something that maybe you've heard or you've thought. The other one is that there are a couple of very similar accounts in other Gospels of a woman who anoints Jesus with oil. But again, that's a different circumstance. And it's a little trippy when there's things like this that happen that are so similar that you just kind of assume, oh, it was the same thing. But actually wasn't. That one was at the home of Simon the leper, which another way this could be confusing, this Pharisee in this account is also named Simon, different Simon, okay? Pharisee, leper. And that woman anointed Jesus' head with oil, and this one, it's his feet. So different situation and different kind of environment altogether, which actually is quite important. So that's a little bit about who this woman is not. All we really know is it says, let's see, a woman in that town who lived a sinful life. She's had a sinful life. We don't know exactly what that means, but there's some clearly immoral things. It's probably reasonable to think that it's talking about a promiscuous lifestyle, perhaps even prostitution. And so that's kind of what we know and what we can infer from this text. But we can conclude that she was a rather unexpected guest in this situation. The fact that she would show up at a Pharisee's house with Jesus was not expected at all to the people there in this situation. Quite possibly this woman had been around Jesus for a little while in the crowds, hearing his preaching, watching what he did with people, how he interacted with people, how he helped people, healed them, and rescued them. And it's reasonable to think that she was probably converted through his ministry already, that she recognized the kind of forgiveness that he was offering. And now she's shown up to express her gratitude. She's overwhelmed with emotion as she is finally near Jesus, and she gets to express to him in worship how he has changed her life. And so it's interesting. It's different, you know. She's crying a lot. She's got tears. They're falling on Jesus' feet. She's using her hair to wipe his feet. It's a little strange maybe, or it sounds strange to us. I think, again, if we understand the cultural context, it makes it a little bit less weird, because in these settings and the way that people would sit or actually recline at a dinner table, kind of sitting with your feet behind you, and often there would be a servant that would come and would wash your feet. It was quite normal in that situation, because you're walking around with, you know, dusty feet and sandals and whatnot. And so that would have typically happened, but it hadn't happened. And so this woman kind of took the role of a servant as a way of expressing her love and worship and gratitude for Jesus, is that she did that for him. And she used this perfume, probably the most valuable thing that she had. And she, in doing so, was kind of anointing Jesus as the Messiah, the one that the Jewish people were longing for and expecting to come to rescue them and to free them from oppression. And so she was kind of quietly declaring, he is the anointed one. Okay, so we're going to pick it up now in verse 39. It says, when the Pharisee who had invited Jesus, saw this, he said to himself, man, if this man were a prophet, he would know who was touching him and what kind of a woman she is, that she is a sinner. Okay, so this is Simon the Pharisee. Again, not Simon the leper. It's also not Simon Peter. There's a lot of Simons around in the Bible. Don't get them confused. It's not Simon Peter, who was one of Jesus' closest disciples. Simon the Pharisee. And if you're not familiar, a Pharisee was a religious teacher, a teacher of the Jewish law, and very devout, and actually known for at times being more concerned about kind of the outward expression or outward appearance of being religious and being holy. Really being concerned about making sure everybody was following all the commandments to a T, and and a lot of times being very kind of critical and judgmental. In fact, Pharisees were very critical of Jesus, because kind of the way he was talking or what he was doing, that he wasn't acting the way that they thought or expected the Messiah to be like. And so, for the most part, Pharisees rejected the idea that Jesus was the Messiah. So why would he invite Jesus to his house? We don't know. Perhaps he was doing it as a way of kind of building up his reputation. There's this religious leader that's getting a lot of attention, so I'm going to invite him into my home so people think I'm very holy and religious. It could have been that. Or maybe he and his friends were kind of trying to make a spectacle out of Jesus. He was going to be their entertainment. They were going to laugh at him. They were going to criticize him. We don't know. But either way, whatever the motivation was, Jesus said yes to the invitation. And so Simon, the Pharisee, was appalled when this woman came and she was there and she was expressing such emotion for Jesus that he did not like it. And he was appalled. He did not want this woman close to himself, for he was too holy to interact with someone with such a life, with such a past. And so he assumed that Jesus wouldn't want to be around this woman either. And you better believe that she felt that judgment, that for her, in that moment of recognizing, man, I feel like I don't belong here. In fact, she knew that she didn't belong in that setting culturally. But she didn't waver. It didn't change how she acted. Her gratitude and her love for Jesus was overwhelming and just welled up into this emotional expression of worship. Before we continue on, I want to stop here and just to make the first point. And it's something that you've heard before if you've been coming, but you belong at the table with Jesus. You belong at the table with Jesus. John has said this in one way or another the last couple of weeks as we've been talking about these meals, but it's worth repeating. I want to tell you a quick story about a high school student named Riley that I knew years and years ago. We used to live in Ferndale up near Bellingham, and he was a student that I actually knew in middle school. I was his middle school football coach, and then knew him through high school, and he was never involved with Young Life. Maybe off and on a little bit, but not very much. And Riley was a tough kid. He was a punk. He wasn't very nice to people. He thought very highly of himself, and certainly did not have a relationship with Jesus. But I had a heart for Riley, and I wanted him to know the forgiveness and hope he could find in Jesus. And so I kind of stuck with him. And finally, this summer, going into his senior year, he came to Young Life Camp with us, Malibu Club up in British Columbia. And Riley had an incredible week. He loved it so much. There's a moment in our cabin one night. We used to, I would pray before we go to bed and thank God for the day and stuff. And then halfway through the week, I'd ask the guys, like, hey, any of you guys want to pray? And usually it's like awkward silence, and oh, that's all right, I'll do it. But this time, it was like maybe night 3 or 4, and Riley pipes up, and he goes, I'll pray, Mondo. And I was like, what? And guys start to snicker, like, Riley's going to pray? And he's, yeah, I got this. I was like, sweet, dude, yeah, go ahead. And he's like, okay. Do I just say, like, dear God, something? Like, yeah, sure, that's good. It doesn't really matter how you start, just whatever you want to say. He's like, cool, okay. Wait, is it God or Jesus? Either one. Like, it's all good, man. Like, however you want to say it. Like, it's all kind of the same. It's good. He's like, all right, cool. Dear God and Jesus, he says. And he goes into this thing and like, I pray that our room wouldn't stink so bad and like all this stuff. In Jesus' name, amen. And the guys are like, yeah, Riley! It was awesome. But then a couple days later, I got to sit with Riley on a bench and talk to him about God's love. And Riley looked at me with tears in his eyes and he says, you have no idea the kind of person I am. You have no idea the kinds of things that I've done. There is no way that Jesus wants me. And I got to look at him and I got to tell him, you're wrong. He does want you. I kind of tried to explain the grace of God, and I tried the hardest I could to help him understand that, to help him accept that. And I wish I could say that he accepted it. But he didn't. He disqualified himself. And you may have reasons why you disqualify yourself from the love and the grace of Jesus. Certainly this woman had reasons, but she didn't let that get in the way. Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. He didn't come just to look for the people that had it all together, who were doing all the things the right way, to say, hey, come, let's have our little righteous party. That's not what Jesus is about, friends. He came for the sick who needed healing, for the broken who needed mending. He invites you to come as you are. You don't have to do anything to fix your life up in order to be eligible for the love and the grace of Jesus. He says, come now. Feeling like you need to fix yourself up is like saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna start going to the gym once I get in great shape. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to take my car to the mechanic once I get it all fixed up and running just right. Those things exist to help that happen, to help you be healthy, to help you be repaired, your car to be repaired. I have no idea, just like with Riley, I have no idea what you've done, what your life is like, or the things that you might feel would disqualify you. But I do know, and I can say with confidence, there's nothing that you've done, nothing that you've said, nothing that you've thought, nothing that you've allowed to happen, nothing that you've experienced, no way that you stumbled and messed up, even when you knew better. There is nothing that disqualifies you from the love and the grace of Jesus Christ. You might be concerned about what other people think. Again, this woman, it's very safe to say that she felt quite judged in this situation. But it didn't matter to her. She did not give the power to other people's opinions and perspectives that they didn't deserve. What Simon the Pharisee thought and the others, it didn't carry the weight for her. She did not allow it to have the power because it didn't have the power. Nobody has the power in your life to decide your value, what you're worth. Only Jesus. I don't know if you've heard Brene Brown speak or read any of her stuff. I've read some of her stuff lately. She's a famous author, speaker. She speaks a lot on shame and vulnerability. And she said this: the opposite of belonging is fitting in. The opposite of belonging is fitting in. She said that, I'm going, tell me more. Because when we're trying to fit in, often we are willing to change something about ourselves. We're trying to adapt so that we will look or be like others, or so that others will like us or want us to be a part of their group. And so, by definition, when we're trying to fit in, we are willing to give up a piece of who we are. But belonging is saying, is believing that I am accepted exactly as I am. I don't have to try to change to be something different in order to belong. You see the difference? Man, that struck me. In Revelation chapter 3, verses 20, Jesus said, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me." Jesus is knocking at your door, and he wants to come in and be with you now. Not if you change this about your life, if you stop doing this or you start doing that. He wants to be with you now. He wants to dine with you. That's the kind of closeness and intimacy he wants to have with you. So the question to reflect on with this point is, what is it that makes it hard to believe that I belong with Jesus? Is there something that holds you back, that makes it hard to believe? Second point, you guys, is we don't get to decide who belongs or not. And you might think, well, yeah, that's obvious. But don't we sometimes act in a way as if we get to decide who belongs or not? Maybe outwardly or maybe just in our heads. I received a letter one time, an anonymous letter from a parent. This was in relation to Young Life, and she was writing and expressing concerns about some of the students that she knew went to Young Life, and she was saying, you wouldn't believe what some of these students are doing on the weekends and what they post on social media, and she was just appalled by some of the poor behavior with these students. And she was essentially telling me, like, you need to have better control over the kids that are involved with Young Life. I really wished I would have had a chance to have a dialogue with this person, because I would have loved to say, it breaks my heart. It absolutely breaks my heart that kids are doing things to try to find life that are actually harming themselves or harming others. But oh my gosh, I'm so glad they're coming to Young Life. Because this is why we exist. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. We want them to come. We want them to know that they belong, to feel loved by us and by Jesus. And we want Jesus to change their heart. And we believe that when Jesus changes their heart, then their lives will change as a result. Their actions will change. But they're going to be transformed from the inside out. We're not a behavior modification ministry, just trying to get them to change how they act, and then we think we've done our job. That's not it at all. And I think sometimes the church can act this way. Or at least people on the outside of the church can feel that this is the way the church acts. Maybe because they've known or seen Christians act this way, or at least it's their perception. That it's like, oh, if you behave like us, then you believe like us, then you'll belong with us. Behave, then you believe, and then you belong. But I'd like to flip that around. Say, what if people felt like they belong first? We want you to be with us exactly as you are. You belong. You don't have to change anything about you. That you are loved and you are valuable. And as people experience that belonging, they may start to believe in the way that Jesus looks at them. Believe in who Jesus is and what he says about them. And often as a result of that belief and that faith, there is a life change. People start to act differently as a result of that. But doesn't that sound more like Jesus, the way that he operated with people? I can tell you, it is more like Jesus. How he went in pursuing his disciples. Do you think he went around looking for the people who were already doing everything right? No, he found a bunch of clumsy idiots who had the potential. He looked at them and he loved them and he knew who they could be. And he showed them, hey, you belong with me now. Come, follow me. I got some stuff I want to show you. So Simon the Pharisee was surprised by the way Jesus reacted to this woman. Rather upset, actually. And Jesus surprised people often. Those who were with him learned to expect the unexpected from Jesus. And the truth is, we might expect that Jesus would be bothered by the people that bother us. He might be bothered by the same things that bother us. Because, whether you want to admit it or not, we are probably bothered by a number of things and bothered by certain people. For example, you might be bothered by people who make certain decisions that we disagree with or do things that we don't think are right. We might be bothered by people who vote differently than us or who root for different teams than we do. We might be bothered by people who have habits that we just don't think are right or healthy. People who think differently about social issues than we do. And we often feel justified in being bothered by or even judging these people who are different than us. I want to propose that Jesus might not share the same frustrations that we have with people. He might not share the same frustrations or the same level of frustration. Jesus told a story in Luke 15. It's a parable. It's a very famous parable of the lost son. There's actually two sons in the story. I'm going to summarize it very quickly. There's an older son and a younger son. And the younger son decided, again, this is a story that Jesus made up to prove a point. The younger son decided, you know what? I don't want to live with you anymore. I'm tired of doing things your way. I'd rather just receive my inheritance early so I can go do my own thing. So the father gives him the inheritance and he goes, and it says that he squandered his wealth in wild living. Just did whatever he wanted. And then there was a famine and he ran out of all of his resources. And he was desperate. It says that he was feeding pigs and he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. And then it says he came to his senses and he goes, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've left the comfort of my home with my father to do this. I've lost everything. Maybe I can go back. Maybe I can go back and kind of earn my way back, earn my father's approval, earn his forgiveness. And he came up with this speech that he set off for home, and he came up with this speech. He's like, okay, Father, I've sinned against heaven. I've sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Just make me like one of your hired servants. So he was going to convince his dad to take him back. And it says that while he was still a long way off, the father saw him, and he didn't wait for him to come give him his speech to convince him to take him back. But the father took off and sprinted to greet his son as soon as he saw him coming. And he met him with overwhelming grace and mercy and forgiveness. The son started his speech, and then he realized, I don't need to try to convince him to take me back because I'm already back in his eyes. The father wanted to throw a huge celebration. Remember, there's an older son. The older son is over here going, are you serious? This kid took your money and left and wasted it. He's wasted his life. You want to know what he's been doing out there? Because I could tell you. He's come back begging for you to take him back, and you're going to throw a party? What in the world is going on? Where is my party? Some of you might be thinking, yeah. And there's probably been situations or circumstances where we could share in those types of feelings. It doesn't make sense. But I love what the Father says. This is what Jesus says the Father tells the older son. He says, son, you've always been with me, and all that I have is yours. But your brother, he was lost, and he's found again. He was dead, but he's alive. Son, we have to throw a party and celebrate. Jesus wants us to share the same compassion that he has for people. He wants us to have open arms and to show people the same grace and mercy that he has shown to us. It doesn't mean that we need to be okay with sin, or sometimes there are people that are toxic for us, and we need to have boundaries about what is appropriate. But all along the way, he desires for us to show people his unconditional love and to believe that God can work in their heart and that they can be transformed from the inside out. You see, this perspective of the older son, or the perspective of the Pharisees in this account, troubled Jesus. And it might be convicting to us if we can identify with some of those thoughts and feelings. But we don't need to despair, because just like Jesus loved the woman, he loved the Pharisee too. He accepted the invitation to come to his house. Just like the father loved and celebrated the younger son in the story, he loved the older son too. Here's a question to reflect on. Do I have compassion for the unexpected guests of Jesus? Okay, I want to jump back into the account before we get to our final point. So we're going to pick it back up in verse 40. Jesus answered Simon. I love that, because it had said that Simon just kind of had said to himself. He didn't say anything out loud. But Jesus is like, yeah, let me answer that. And you're like, what? This happens multiple times. It says where people just think something, and Jesus is like, I'm going to address that for you. Weirds people out, but I love it. So in verse 41, it says, 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. So Jesus is telling another parable, a story to try to help the Pharisee understand what's going on here. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm just saying it. Denarii. Let's go with that. And the other one 50. So one owed 500, the other one 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Okay, so just so for some context, for the denarii, the amount of money, there's a note that says a denarius, which is apparently an individual denarii. Denarius is equal to a day's wages. Okay, so 500 denarii. You take out weekends, that's maybe about a year or 2 years worth of wages. And the other one is 50, that's maybe a couple months worth of wages. So that's how much these 2 different people owe the person. And so he's asking if they were both forgiven, which one of them would appreciate it more? Well, Simon's like, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. Jesus says, yeah, that's right, you've judged correctly. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, you see this woman, I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Again, helpful to understand in the culture, to wash the feet, to greet with a kiss, to anoint with oil. We're all somewhat normal thing, so it wasn't as weird as it might sound to us in our context. So she's saying, you didn't do these things, but this woman did, and you're the host. So he's trying to help him understand this. So let's pick up in verse 47. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. It says, he's saying to Simon, she's loving lavishly because she has been forgiven of much, and she knows it. It's important to make the distinction here. She's not loving a lot she's not forgiven because of how she's showing this love. She's not forgiven because of her actions. But she's showing this love and this gratitude because she is forgiven. It says, as her great love has shown, like she's been forgiven as she is showing with her great love. And then he says, but if you've been forgiven little, you love little. And he's saying to Simon is that you don't seem to feel a need to be forgiven. You think you're doing it just right. The same forgiveness is offered to Simon, but he appears to just not really care or feel like he needs it. Then to wrap up the section, it says that Jesus said to her, he turns to the woman, he says, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? This drove them bonkers. The Pharisees hated this idea that Jesus was forgiving people of their sins. And there might have been some in the room who were blown away by this. Like, wow, he's able to forgive sins. And he says to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Her faith, that she has already believed that she has been forgiven and expressed through her love, she's able to go in peace and live in freedom. Final point I want to make is just what Jesus is saying here, is that the more we need Jesus, the more we love him. The more we recognize our need for Jesus, because we all need Jesus. But the more we recognize our need for Jesus, the more grateful we are and the more authentic our worship is. This woman has shown us that in its purest form, just this overwhelming sense of gratitude. And you can, this makes sense when you think about the more you feel like you need something, the more special it is for you. For example, if you're facing extreme hunger or extreme thirst, then when you get to have that meal or you get to quench that thirst, it just hits different. It's different than just like, yeah, I haven't eaten for a couple hours. But when you're desperate for that, it's like, oh my gosh. Or let's say, for example, hypothetically, your favorite baseball team hasn't made the playoffs for 21 years. Then when the Seattle Mariners make the playoffs last year, for those of us who have been fans for a long time, it's just more special. It's more impactful. Or maybe some who have longed to have kids and they face infertility. Or they've had miscarriage after miscarriage. And it starts to feel like there's no way I'm ever going to have a healthy pregnancy. But then it happens. Or you are able to adopt a child, that now having that child it's just different. So when we have a greater need than when we get what we're looking for, it means that much more. So this woman's love for God is a result of the forgiveness that she had experienced. One of the commentaries I read, there was this idea that greater sinners become greater saints. Greater sinners become greater saints because there's a greater sense of need, and the forgiveness and grace of Jesus just carries more weight, and there's a more significant transformation. The response to God's grace is powerful. I love what the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He's talking about God. He said, "But he said to me," God said, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." So then Paul says, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." When I realize my need for Jesus and my weaknesses, if that's going to allow God's power to be more profound in my life, then that's where I want to be. I want to live in that place of recognition. The more we are aware of our weakness, the more God's power can take place in our lives. The emptier we are, the more we can allow Him to fill us up. I had a friend who, I remember, was talking about Jesus inviting Peter to walk on water with him. So Peter gets out of the boat and he's walking towards Jesus. But there's wind and there's waves, and he gets distracted and he takes his eyes off of Jesus and he sinks into the water, but Jesus reaches out and he grabs him and he rescues him. And the point my friend was making about this is that we continually need Jesus to rescue us. It's not a one-time thing. It's not just it's not just about the initial salvation or conversion. But as we walk with Jesus, there's going to be many times where we need Jesus to rescue us over and over again. So my friend asked this question: when was the last time you needed Jesus to save you? When was the last time you needed Jesus to save you? Because the more aware of our need for Him, then the more His power is able to be displayed in our lives. And Ephesians 1 says this is the same power that God used to raise Jesus from the dead. It's available to you in your life as you go every day. But often it feels like we just leave that power on the shelf. But I pray that when we do have times of need, whether it's financial struggle, broken or strained relationships, a health scare in your life or somebody that you love, or loss of a loved one, when we mess up, when we hurt somebody's feelings or they hurt our feelings, when we face tragedies big and small, that we would recognize our need for Jesus, and in desperation that we would cling to Him and that we would experience His power. But also that we wouldn't wait for those times. We wouldn't wait for the lows. But we would live in a place of recognizing our continual, constant need for Jesus. Because when we do, we are walking with Him and experiencing His love and loving Him back in the way that He designed for us to. My grandma on my dad's side passed about, I want to say 9 or 10 years ago. And we called her Meemaw. Meemaw was from the South before she came up here, and her oldest grandkids, my cousins, lived in the South. They called her Meemaw. It's a Southern thing. At her funeral, I remember my Uncle Joe, who's the youngest of her 5 kids, sharing. He said, we used to often ask Mom which one of us was her favorite. And her response was always, whichever one needs me the most. Whichever one of my children need me the most is my favorite. And then Uncle Joe says, I was her favorite a lot. When we cling to Jesus in desperation, like this woman did, when we come to Jesus with this sort of need, then we are able to experience the closeness, the bond, and the love that He is inviting us to. Jesus wants us to need Him just like my Meemaw did. How often, this is the question for reflection, how often do I recognize my need for Jesus? I'm going to invite the band to come up to close us, but I want to show you a picture as the band's coming up. I don't know if you've seen this before. It's a famous icon painted by a Russian painter in the 15th century. I'm going to butcher his name, but I'm going to say it anyway. Andrei Rublev, something like that. It's a painting of three angels that represent the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, three different expressions of God. What I love about this painting is that they're sitting around a table on three of the four sides, but there's one side that's open. Because that's my place at the table. And it's your place at the table. We've been saved a seat, friends, at the table of God. There's an empty chair for you, and that's where you belong. Just like the Father in the parable that Jesus told, I want you to believe that Jesus' arms are always open, and He's watching and waiting, hoping that one day you would come home so He can run and greet you and He can shower you with His grace. Don't hesitate to come home. And please, friends, let's not forget our need for Jesus. Let's allow Him to fill us up so that our lives are an act of worship as a result. That He can be our strength when we are weak, and He can give us the peace and the freedom that He longs for us to experience. During this song, we're going to invite you to take communion with us together as a church. This is an opportunity for us to remember our need and to remember the way Jesus responded, that He has given everything for us so that we can belong with Him. So during the song, there are stations around the room to grab the elements. You can bring them back to your seat and we'll take them together in a moment.
Hey, thanks for joining us this morning for our online sermon. We love the opportunity to connect with you. We would enjoy meeting you in person, but you can also fill out a connection card that you can find online. If you have anything that we can pray for you, we can rejoice with you, please reach out to our prayer team. There's an email listed below. We will get back with you. We will pray with you. We want to support you and celebrate with you. If you have any questions or want to know what's going on with Newbridge, how you can get involved and stay connected, check us out on social media, download the program notes that are found here, or again, reach out to us at our office. We will connect with you, answer any questions, meet up, and support you, again, wherever you're at in this crazy, beautiful thing we call life.